Awesome, everybody flooding in now. Lovely. Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us for this evening's launch and discussion of S.J. Watson's latest thriller, Final Cut. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm currently broadcasting to you from, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before we begin tonight and I hand you over to this evening's speakers, I'd just like to quickly reiterate some of the information that I mentioned in the email that I sent you earlier with the link to join tonight's event. So you've all automatically been placed on mute for this evening, but don't worry, that doesn't mean that you won't have the opportunity to ask questions. We'll just be doing it a little bit differently. So we'll be using the chat box function. If you can't see the chat box, you should be able to find it towards the bottom left of your screen. If you click on it, then you'll be able to type your questions and they'll come directly through to me and I'll read them out along with your name towards the end of the evening when we go to the Q&A section. So I'd also like to mention that we have a special promotion on this evening, which is that if you use the code EVENT at checkout, then you'll receive 10% off all books ordered from our website within the next 24 hours. So I'll be posting the link to purchase your copy of Final Cut shortly in the chat box. So make sure that you grab your copies early to make the most of that discount. And so I would now like to introduce S.J. Watson. Steve's first novel, Before I Go to Sleep, has sold more than 6 million copies worldwide. It won the Crime Writers Association Award for Best Debut Novel and the Galaxy National Book Award for Crime Thriller of the Year. The film of the book, starring Nicole Kidman, Colin Firth, and Mark Strong, was released in 2014. S.J.'s second novel, Second Life, a psychological thriller, was published to acclaim in 2015. He was born in the Midlands and now lives in London. In conversation with Steve tonight is Krissy Kneen. Krissy is a beloved member of the Avid Reader family and my colleague as part of the events team. She's also the author of many books, including An Uncertain Grace, which was shortlisted for the Stella Prize, as well as Wintering, which has been shortlisted for several awards. She was also recently awarded Copyright Agency's Fellowship for Non-Fiction Writing to research and write the first draft of With This Body, which will be published by text in 2022. So, Krissy and Steve, I'd now like to hand over to you both.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Emma Kate. That was really great. I am going to start by mentioning that this particular book that we're talking about tonight is very difficult to talk about tonight because the spoilers start on page 2 or 3 and continue at a rapid pace throughout the entire 400 pages of the book. So you are never left to be settled with the story, and it completely changes from page to page, which keeps you turning the pages very rapidly indeed. So basically, Final Cut, which I have a copy of here, beautiful jacket. Final Cut, it's set in a place called Blackwood Bay, which is an ordinary place, home to ordinary people. It used to be a buzzing seaside destination, and now it's ravaged by the effects of dwindling tourism and an economic downturn. It seems like a ghost town and the perfect place for filmmaker Alex to shoot her new documentary. But the community is deeply suspicious of her intentions. After all, nothing exciting ever happens in Blackwood Bay, or does it? I have stuck to the blurb from the back of the book because if I stray by one sentence, you're going to find out something that you shouldn't. So without actually giving any spoilers, Steve, I wondered if maybe you could treat us to a little bit of the book with a short reading at the beginning.
Yeah. I'd love to. Thank you very much, Krissy. So I'm going to read literally from page 1. So just read a page and a bit, just to give you a flavour of it. She runs across the moor as hard and as fast as she can. The sliver of an old moon hangs above her, and somewhere far behind, the village lights shine in an anemic yellow. But she keeps her eyes fixed forward. She sees nothing but the road ahead and hears only the wheeze of her dry breath and the cawing of the gulls as they swoop and dive. There are no sounds of pursuit, No shouting, no howling of dogs. She is safe, she thinks. She can calm down, stop running and walk. It's over. But still, she runs. She pushes herself harder. Her limbs wheel, momentum carries her until she's on the edge of tumbling like a marionette, wires snipped, head over heels. A car flashes past on the horizon, and then it happens. Her body goes numb, as if she's fallen into cotton wool. Her arms and legs circle in front of her, but they look alien. They're moving independently. She has no control. It's like looking through the wrong end of a telescope. She tries to draw breath, to blink herself back to reality, but it's too late. Her body has rebelled. When she tries to stop running, she finds she can't. Her foot hits something then. It registers only as an abstract pain, dull, like the dentist's drill after the needle. But still she trips in slow motion as if falling through sludge. Her hands fly forward and she hits the cold ground, squeezing the breath from her lungs like air from a paper bag. She lies still. She could rest, she thinks, forever if need be. She sees herself as if from a distance, as if she's in a documentary. She's lying there in the dark, her eyes open, her lips blue. They'll find her in the morning, frozen. It wouldn't be so bad. But no, she won't die here, not like this. Energy rushes in, a shot of adrenaline, and she gets clumsily to her feet. She walks, putting one foot carefully in front of the other, over and over, until finally she reaches the junction. Her eyes dart. She shakes, though she doesn't feel fear. She doesn't feel anything. She puts her rucksack at her feet, then holds out her hand, thumb up. It's early morning and the road isn't busy. Cars pass infrequently, but eventually one stops. The driver winds down the window. It's a man, of course, but beggars can't be choosers. Where to, love? He says, but she doesn't know how to answer him. She hasn't thought that far ahead. She imagines Bluff House. It's as if it's right in front of her, silhouetted against the pale sky, huge and looming with a solitary light shining in an upstairs room. She can never go back. Love? She shakes her head. She knows where she wants to end up, but not how to get there, and she has to choose somewhere before he drives off. Anywhere, she says, before opening the door and climbing in. Anywhere, just away. I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. So you can see from that reading how tense and immediate the language is in this book, and the idea of it being in first person and in the present tense adds to that kind of that tension. Can you talk a little bit about the first person and the present tense and the choice of those two things, and how it is to work with that when, especially when, you know, it can be such a limiting perspective?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've always, well, with the three books so far, I kind of almost thrive on restriction or on placing obstacles, maybe. I mean, before I go to sleep, it was about a woman who doesn't remember anything. So that in itself, in the first person, so that in itself was already a huge kind of mountain to climb. So I think, yeah, it's kind of a trade-off, I think, for me. It's sort of, yeah, the first person, as you say, is very limiting because obviously, for obvious reasons, you know, you can only talk about what the character can see. And if you want to get any other perspective in at all, you have to find a different way of doing it, which with this book I kind of do, because there are a few, as you know, Krissy, having read it, but there were a few kind of scenes for, not really scenes, but like documents, like this the odd newspaper story or pages from journals or medical notes, medical reports. So that was a way of just getting in another perspective. But I think what you gain from first person and present tense, especially, is that kind of immediacy. I think for a book like this, and with all my books so far, that's outweighed any disadvantage. That kind of ability to really put the reader in the story, I think. And I don't know. It's also, having said all of that, it's also, I don't know if it's the same for you when you write, but it's not really a decision I sit down and think, okay, here's my list of pros, here's my list of cons. Should I do it in first or third, past or present? It just kind of feels right. And if I start writing and it doesn't feel right, I know that I probably need to try something else. I remember, sorry?
So do you come up against those barriers as you're working though and go, oh, that's right, it's first person, I can't give that information to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, less so with this book. I think it's interesting actually with this book because I remember quite a while ago now I was writing it, and the chapters didn't quite alternate, but there were several many chapters from a male character's point of view, which were in the past tense, if I remember rightly. But that was that was kind of an arbitrary decision, really. I think it was just to give him a very different sort of sounding voice. And as I was writing it though, and I would actually joke, I mean, I remember doing an event for Second Life, but talking about this, and somebody asked me about the new book, which was the book that became Final Cut. And I said, I'm writing it, it's got two voices, a man and a woman. And I said, but even as I'm writing it, the woman, she keeps on tapping me on the shoulder and saying, you know, this is my book, don't you? He says, why do you keep on writing scenes from his point of view? And I was joking, but actually, the evolution of this book was me realizing that actually it was her book, and that the other character's perspective really wasn't doing it any favors. So it's a very kind of organic thing, I think. And yeah, when I'm coming up against stuff, and I think, I mean, that's why with the epistolary forms in this book, it was a way of getting, you know, quite an easy way, which I also had a lot of fun with, of just getting in other perspectives and other slightly, you know, examining things from a different point of view. But yeah, I sort of thrive on that though, I think.
I can't even imagine this book with a second person narrating.
You'd be surprised when I tell you who it was. It was the David character as well. So
I was thinking that. I was thinking, I wonder if it was David. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That would have been...
I still find him really fascinating. I still feel he's got a lot of story that I didn't get to. But anyway, we can't talk about that because it's a spoiler.
Yeah, it is a spoiler. You actually are, you are drawn to the female characters led us through each of your 3 books. And I wonder whether that's a conscious decision, or whether, and obviously in this case, it was one that you, did you consciously go, well, this time I'm going to write from a male perspective as well as a female perspective, because I'm so sick of being asked that question at writers' festivals.
There was a bit of that actually, but Michael at Text actually, I do remember. I was at, he kind of warned me in a kind of slightly strange way. But I was over in Australia before I go to sleep, so I was about to start writing the book that became Second Life, and I was having dinner with Michael, who's my editor for those that may not know, my Australian editor, and he said, "Oh, tell me about the new book that you're working on then." And I said, "Oh, I'm going to write it I'm definitely going to write it from a male point of view in the third person." And he said, "Why?" Which is a really I mean, it's, you know, on the one hand, it's a very simple question, but actually it's a very perceptive question, because it's someone else asking you that. I don't know if you feel the same. It forced me to, well, why have I made that decision? And I said, just because I want to see if I can do it. Or just because I want to change, I think I said. And he said, "Steve, that's the worst reason I've ever heard for doing something like that." And he's absolutely right. I think it has to come from a place where it just what feels like the right voice or the right story to tell. So I don't sit down and think, I'm going to write this from a female point of view again. I think it's just, those are the stories that I feel drawn to. And I think the challenges that women face in society interest me more perhaps than, because a lot of my books are about power, aren't they? So
yeah, they are, and they're enormous. The women in your books are enormously vulnerable. Each of these 3 women are in a position, for one reason or another, for each of the books, that they're incredibly vulnerable. And I think that for me, that kind of almost ramps up the ante in terms of the stress that you feel wanting them to be safe as you're reading.
Yeah, I mean, I think we spoke about this, didn't we, before with Second Life? And I remember you saying that you'd read somewhere that, let me try and get this right, especially around online dating, which Second Life dealt with a lot, as you know. But that kind of thing that men are frightened of women laughing at them, whereas women are frightened of men killing them. And I think that really, I can't really not want to explore that especially someone who writes thrillers and psychological fiction, psychological thrillers and crime fiction.
Well, thrillers, they're a very particular beast, and there's a kind of you need to make sure that the audience is engaged enough to turn the page, to keep turning the page. But also you need to hold a lot of stuff back from an audience. How do you kind of navigate those kind of states of giving them enough to turn a page? Do you actually have to go back through it and kind of work out whether there are any bits that that are too much about I don't know, character or something, and not enough about the
I mean, exactly that. I have to just go through it again and again and again. And yes, and it is a fine line, because on the one hand you want people to turn the page, but on the other hand, if you just make it twist after twist after twist after twist, or with no kind of development, or no moments of no opportunity, I suppose, to take a breath between those kind of more intense scenes, then it just becomes this very sort of, becomes too action driven, or too too quick, I suppose. So it is just kind of, when I'm writing, my first drafts tend to be a bit breathless, if anything, and a bit sort of like, just get the story, and terrible things happen, and then sometimes I have to, like, then on the second and third draft, then pare it back a little bit. And by that point as well, I know my characters even better than in the first draft, just from having written them. So then that's when I can then sort of do a bit more of the development work to sort of open it out a little bit, because I do want to write characters that people identify with and enjoy spending time with, whether they like them or not. I think I don't like the thought that a lot of thriller and crime fiction, it's certainly thought of, I mean, whether this is true or not, and it's true in some cases, but the characters can be very sort of like in service to the plot. For me, it has to be both. The plot comes from the character evolves because of what the plot needs, but actually the character, if anything, the character has to come first.
Do you have to do a deep dive into other thrillers while you're working on a book to kind of, or do you just do that naturally? Do you get drawn to other thrillers to kind of work out the mechanisms and to see what works and what doesn't?
I don't really, when I'm working on a book, I don't like have any rules in terms of what I read, but I probably do avoid, weirdly, I think I avoid any fiction that feels like it's in the area that I'm working in. And I think it's because I still have this fear that I'm accidentally going to copy somebody, or just read, either read a book that's so bad that I just think, what's the point of, or more likely, read a book that's so good that I then think, what's the point of me trying to work in this field, or trying to do something. So I tend to sort of stay away from other people's fiction. I mean, I read thriller fiction, but I tend to choose stuff that's quite different.
Were there any books that fed this book? Were you can you point to a stack of books and go, these are the books that I needed to read to get into?
Yeah, I can, but I can't tell you what they are, because they deal with, having read the book, what's really going on in the village. So I read a lot of, mostly non-fiction actually, around that issue. I know it's very cryptic for everyone out there who hasn't read it. But I read a lot of non-fiction around that, which was quite horrifying, really. And I had to tone a lot of the stuff down. I think a lot of people, when people say to me, this book's quite dark, I say, yeah, but it would be a lot, if it was more truthful to real life, it would be a lot darker, and probably too dark to, it's true what they say, isn't it, about truth, the truth being stranger than fiction, but the truth is also darker, I think, than fiction. You can't get away with it you can't get away with telling the truth in fiction, if that makes sense. Anyway, so I do have a stack of books, but
I don't think it's giving anything away to say that this book sort of follows an obsession with the idea of unreliable memory, and I think that's not a spoiler in itself.
No, I don't know exactly. Yeah.
Do you have a particular interest? Because before I go to sleep, of course, unreliable memory. What do you have a particular interest in that area, or is it something that you've had to research at all?
I do have an interest in it. Yeah, I mean, I keep being drawn back to it, don't I, in my fiction, and I think that speaks to the fact that I obviously have some quite deep underlying fascination with memory. I mean, I was out having dinner just last night, and we started talking about this, and a friend of mine asked me what my earliest memory was, and I told him basically it's from when I was like 2 years of age or something. But then I realized that actually what's probably happened is at some point my mother has told me this thing that happened when I was 2, and I imagined it, and now that's sort of now in my head as a memory, and so I don't actually remember, because it's very unlikely I remember anything that early. But those kind of things really fascinate me, and all the experiments that people have done about memory, and the planting of false memories, and people being absolutely convinced that they saw something, and then I don't know how widespread the story got, but this is several years ago now, but there was a guy that was shot dead by the police because it was just after the London bombing that we had over here. And anyway, he was followed onto the tube, the underground train, and they shot him and killed him. And lots of witnesses came forward and said that they'd seen this guy, and he was wearing, it was the middle of summer, but he was wearing very bulky, sort of big jacket, as if he had a suicide device, I suppose, and had leapt over the platform, over the barriers to get down into the platform level on the train. And loads of people came forward to say this, and then they showed them footage, the CCTV footage of him, and he was wearing, he'd got a jacket on, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary for the weather. And he didn't leap over the barrier. He just put his ticket in and walked through like anybody else. I think he was in a hurry. I think he was late. It turned out he was late for an appointment or a job interview or something. So he was rushing, but he wasn't jumping or leaping or anything. And it fascinated me, first of all, that these people were so sure. And secondly, when they were shown this footage, which proved that their memory was wrong, was false, they refused, not in every case, but in most cases, they absolutely refused to believe it and were convinced it was doctored footage. And it's so, our memories are so kind of, maybe it's something about they're so integral to our sense of self and who we are that we have to believe them, even when all the evidence is saying this is wrong, this never happened. So yeah, it is a fascination of mine, and yeah, and with this book especially, I think, because this, unlike with Before I Go to Sleep, because they're very different books, I think, but with Before I Go to Sleep, she's a woman who, she knows she has an unreliable memory. She knows that there are big holes in her memory. Whereas this is a character who doesn't really know that, and so this is a character who is unreliable, but in a slightly different way, because she doesn't know that she's unreliable. So I had a lot of fun with that sort of thing.
You also, this one and the book before, The Second Life, you deal with technology a bit, and that's something that I've noticed a lot of writers tend to not include technology in their work. It seems to be something that that writers are a little bit kind of afraid of almost. But your last book dealt with the internet and identities, online identities, and this one deals with documentary making. So how did you, are you interested in new technologies? Or does the technology lead you into a story when you're kind of writing about it?
I think a bit of both, really. I am interested, and I think I want to write contemporary fiction that's set in the here and now, and I think the world is changing so rapidly. I mean, especially at the moment, this year has been a particular bump in the road.
We will get onto that.
Yeah, but just generally, I mean, one of the things I was fascinated with this book is just how much we're, not everybody obviously, but how much we're driven now to document everything. And it's like, it's almost as if, if I have a great breakfast and avocado, on toast or whatever, it's not real unless I've photographed it and shared it with my Instagram followers or my, Twitter followers and everything. And I like that connectedness. I mean, especially lately, I mean, I live alone. And so especially during lockdown over here, it's been great to sort of be able to sit on my phone and talk to people and connect with people on Twitter and Instagram and whatever. But it's not a way that I didn't grow up like that. I mean, I remember, in my 20s, I traveled Europe on a train, and I took my camera, and in my camera I maybe took 2 films with 36 shots on each, and so I probably came back from that month trip with 72 photos, which I then had to go and get developed at the local chemist, and to go from that in I'm not that old, so it's not that much of a time, has passed to now that I could take 72 photos in a day. I mean, I don't generally, but people do. And And that kind of fascinates me. And with video as well, I mean, it used to be a camcorder used to be, I don't know, £500 or 500, which would be, I don't know, similar amount in Australia, I suppose, but like prohibitively expensive. It was, and then you had to buy tapes for it. And then, but now we're all not all of us, but most people are carrying around a device which they can film things with all the time. So I was just really interested in that. And with this book, it was a lot of it was about, I wanted to explore this. What about if a documentary filmmaker invited people to tell their own story with films they'd shot themselves of their own life, but then things started to emerge from those stories that were darker or more sinister. And there's lots of stuff in there about consent as well. And, you know, if someone is filming these, there are two schoolgirls in particular who are being filmed, but it's clear they don't know they're being filmed. And so where is the consent, and what's okay to upload and what's okay to share? That kind of stuff all really fascinates me. But it's interesting what you say about technology, I think, because I think especially for crime writers, people do often talk about this like pre-mobile phone and post-mobile phone, because especially with crime fiction now, it's really difficult, because it used to be very easy to have two characters unable to communicate, you know, whereas now you have to try and invent a plausible reason why one person can't just pick up the phone and ring the other one and say, where are you? You know, this is happening, come quickly, or whatever, you know. So actually I don't, because in this book it would have been quite easy, because Blackwood Bay is based on a real place in the north of England where there is terrible mobile phone coverage. So I could have actually got around that quite easily by just saying there is no reception here.
And you mentioned that a couple of times in the book. I think she goes into areas where the phone reception goes, and you're like, oh, yeah, I know that place.
Yeah. I try to not make that too much as like a plot point though, because it feels a bit too convenient. But yeah, it's getting tricky. I think the other thing as well that people are, I'm always slightly aware of with writing stuff like this, in terms of the modern technology and everything, and modern social networking, I suppose, is I don't want the book to date too quickly. So although I'm using these things, I don't know that Instagram, for example, is even mentioned in the book. I think it's just, I talk about uploading films to a server, because I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. So, you know, I'm careful not to sort of date things, because I'm very aware of the date, the thing I stopped. Like Snapchat is the moment I thought, I don't know what Snapchat is, and back then I was in my 40s, so I was like, do I need to know really? So that's the day I kind of left it behind a little bit.
But you're all over TikTok, aren't you?
I don't know. No, and people send. I've got friends who send me TikTok films, whatever they are, and they're quite amusing sometimes. But no, I don't have a TikTok account. I don't want to learn. That's for other people.
Stop.
Too much, exactly. Yeah.
The book itself is actually kind of almost structured like a documentary in way. That it jumps, you know, you have flash forwards and you have not flash forwards, flashbacks, and you kind of you knit together potential ideas with then real ideas that you see on film. So that have been filmed sometimes contradicts things that have been remembered in that way.
Yeah.
I don't think that's too much of a spoiler.
No.
Were you watching documentaries to kind of look at the structure of documentaries and how they're put together when you were writing this?
That's interesting actually, because I've always enjoyed documentaries, but yeah, I don't really watch them. I get too absorbed into the story or into the thing that they're, you know, talking about, the topic. So I don't sit there with a note. Even if I did sit there with a notepad looking at how they were structured, I think I would just find, I haven't written a note for 25 minutes. So, you know, because I just get sucked in. So I haven't kind of studied, I didn't sort of study how they're put together, but I think maybe by a process of osmosis, I've kind of absorbed how a documentary, you know, it is structured. And and you're exactly right. You know, it's kind of that looking at different pieces of evidence and leaving question marks over things, opening questions up, answering some of them, but making sure you don't, like, there's always something else to be discovered. It's interesting. I mean, a lot of true crime documentaries, especially, it kind of ties back to what I was saying earlier. Some of the things in them is so crazy and unbelievable. I'm constantly thinking, I couldn't put this in fiction. So then I thought, well, if I write fiction about documentary, maybe that's the way around it.
Yeah, true. That's true. The actual documentary at the heart of this, the documentary that Alex is making in Blackwood Bay, is that based on anything, or did you decide that would be a good idea for a documentary, or did you see something like it?
A bit of both, actually. Not based on, but it was very much inspired by a film from a few years ago called Life in a Day, which was coincidentally actually produced by the same people who did Before I Go to Sleep, but that is just a coincidence. But yeah, so what they did when they made that film was they asked people around the world, everywhere from, Sydney, London, capital cities in the Western world, to sort of indigenous tribes in South America. They gave them cameras, and they just asked them on a particular day of the year. I think it was probably 2015, 16 maybe, just to record their life, just to record scenes in their life. And they thousands and thousands of hours worth of footage they sort of had, and they obviously edited those together to form a kind of narrative of the life on Earth, basically on this one particular day. And that really is a really fascinating film. It's not without its flaws, but it's really fascinating because there's one in particular that went from a shot of a boy in Mexico who was asked to empty his pockets, and he had like a pencil or something, and that was his position. That was what he owned. That was all he owned in the world. And then it went from that to someone in the States who was complaining because the Wi-Fi router or something wasn't powerful enough in his house, and you just see the disparity in the way that people are living. So that really fascinated me. And so, yeah, that was very definitely one of the things that fed into it. And then the other one was the other main one was a film called 3 Salons at the Seaside, which is from the 80s. I think it's the early 80s, a British documentary where they basically shot footage of women having their weekly shampoo and set, older women generally having their shampoo and set in these 3 sort of slightly old-fashioned now, especially now, hair salons in the north of England. And it doesn't sound gripping, but it is, because obviously it's not a film about people having their hair done. It's a film about them, the gossip and their everyday life, and the way that this is a community of people who are all interconnecting, and their weekly treat was having their hair done while their husbands were down the pub, kind of playing darts and stuff. It was just really kind of an interesting. So I think, yeah, I kind of like was looking at how everyday life can be really fascinating. But then, of course, I had to throw a few hand grenades in.
Yeah, you certainly do. But I do want to see that film about the hairdressing salon. I think that sounds fascinating.
It's on YouTube. It's 3 Salons at the Seaside. It's only I think it's about 40 minutes long, but yeah, it's definitely worth a look.
I'm going to have a look.
Yeah.
The idea of place is really important in this book. Possibly more so than your other books, I think. There's a real kind of focus on both the small town and also the city, and the differences between the city and the small town. Did you have to actually physically go to a similar small town to kind of get those details?
Yeah, well, Blackwood Bay is very, very much based on a fishing village in the north of England called Robin Hood's Bay, to the point that anyone who's been anywhere near Robin Hood's Bay, it's not going to be a question mark. It's going to be, oh, okay, And that was very deliberate. I mean, Robin Hood's Bay really, I haven't been there many times, but I've been there 5 or 6 times now, and one time was for research, a year or so, or a little while ago. It's just such a strange, magical place for me, because first of all, it's in North Yorkshire, and where there are so to get to it, you have to drive over the moor for like an hour. So you drive through, fields and moorland and heather and sheep, and, that's the landscape. So you very much feel like you're almost traveling backwards in time. But then just before you reach Robin Hood's Bay, you pass an RAF, an Air Force base. I think it's an Air Force base, I don't know, which has got this huge like obelisk. It looks like a cross between an alien spaceship and I mean, I presume it's something to do with radar. I have no idea what it is, but it's in the distance. It's kind of lit up. It just looks like an alien thing. and then you reach Robin Hood's Bay itself, and it's very steep. So it's kind of basically these old tiny cottages kind of dotted around, quite compact, quite a lot of them in quite a small space, but on the side of the cliff with a very steep road down. So cars can't really get down there. So when you're there, it is like going back in time, you know, and there's one main road, and off it there are lots of alleyways and kind of strange paths, cobbled, and you go up one and you're not sure if it's going to lead to a group of houses or a church or a park or the cliffs or a dead end. And then you kind of, it is crazy because you kind of go up one and then you find yourself on the other side of town. And well, it's almost like some kind of weird portal that you've passed through. So, and
an Esher.
exactly that. Yeah. And it used to be famous for smuggling. So there's a story that they used to be able to land their contraband down at beach level in the caves and get it up to the cliffs without it seeing the light of day. So there's allegedly, there's a network of tunnels that are kind of been hewn through the rock that connect all the cellars. And I mean, that's, you know, the metaphor there is you know, it's obvious, isn't it? That kind of hidden secrets coming to the surface and what's buried underneath this kind of quaint facade, beautiful facade. So yeah, it's very much based on there, but I fictionalized it because, as you know, having read it, there aren't that many nice people in the fictional Blackwood Bay, and lots of quite bad stuff happens there. And I thought that it would be, I don't want to write about this place that I love and find that they never have me back there again. I get thrown out of town, or like Wicker Man style or something, because I've onto the town.
Hopefully they'll embrace it now that you've called it something else and get you
exactly. Yeah. And there is a note in the back of the book saying this is not based on Robin Hood's Bay. The people there are lovely.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
We do have to throw to questions soon, but I've just got a couple more before we do. And I think that one of them was that before I go to sleep was such a massive instant success for you, like every writer's dream. And having a film, like a major motion picture being made about your book. Well, firstly, I was thinking of that when I was reading this book and thinking, he got interested in film life from being on a film set. Book. But also, how can you tell us a little bit about how that experience is, watching your book being turned into a film?
I probably can't. I mean, I probably come across as some awful person now, but like it is amazing. I mean, I can't pretend it's not. I think I had a particularly good experience. You know, I've spoken and met people, authors who've had their books turned into films or TV and things, and not had a great experience and not enjoyed the process at all. But I was incredibly lucky because it was just a joy from beginning to end, really. And I think that was partly because, well, mainly actually because the people who were making it, so Rowan, who wrote and directed it, and Liza, who was the producer, they wanted me to be involved, and were very happy. And it was also a London-based production, so it wasn't like it was all happening over in LA or somewhere else. It was like on my doorstep. But I'm kind of made the decision not to really get involved because I wanted it to be their project. And I thought, you know, all I'll probably do is mess it up if I try and get involved too much. So I sort of just let them get on with it, really. And that meant that I could just enjoy it. And so I was, you know, turning up on set and making a nuisance of myself. And I think it's quite funny because the first time I was on set, I imagined that everybody there was a bit like, oh, I know the author's in today, so we've got to be on best behaviour, and I hope he's not going to complain. And I think they thought I was there to sort of start going, well, that colour of that carpet is the wrong colour. That would never, you know. But actually, I was like a kid in a sweet shop, just kind of, oh my god. I was even excited about the people with lights, you know. It's like so because I never thought I'd be anywhere near a film set at all. It always felt like such a kind of exciting, glamorous world. I mean, having done it now, I realise it's quite boring, isn't it? You know, but a
little bit more glamorous than sitting at your desk and writing a book.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, but to be on a film set, not only seeing people bring to life the characters I'd invented, that would be surreal and incredible. But when it's Nicole Kidman and Colin Firth, it was just. It was. I mean, I remember. I was on the set. It must have been the first time I'd gone in, actually, and I was playing on my phone or something, or doing something, and Liza tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Oh, can I just introduce you to Nicole?" And I look up, and there's Nicole. Not only is Nicole Kidman, but there is Nicole Kidman dressed. She was in costume, ready to do a take. So looking like this character that had started off in my head, and it was, but with an Australian accent, which I wasn't expecting. For some reason, I mean, I knew that Nicole Kidman was Australian, but for some reason I wasn't. Anyway, it was just the surrealist thing, and it was a wonderful experience, you know. And I think I just decided I would, you know. But by the 9th time I turned up on set, I think everyone would say, "Oh no, he's just here to sort of like to look, yeah, just ignore him, feed him a sandwich every now and again, and he's fine."
It's an experience that couldn't have happened to a nicer person. I'm very glad that
Thank you.
that your book was so successful. One thing that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is the difference that writers face now, because writing all of the books that we've written in the past are kind of in the past, and now fiction writer, we're facing a world that is incredibly changed. And I wonder how you feel about that as a fiction writer.
I think it's different. It's a difficult issue, isn't it? I mean, I think, especially because, as I said earlier, I want to write contemporary books, but because of the time lag, you know, the book I'm working on at the moment, for example, it's going to be a year at least until it comes out, more likely 2 or possibly more, hopefully not more, but you know, and the world at the moment is changing so rapidly that none of us know where we're going to be in a year's time, whether, you know, the virus is going to have magically disappeared, fingers crossed, but I don't know, you know, or whether, we just don't know. And so do I write now, do I write now as if I'm writing now and it's set now, in which case it's very difficult to even have characters interacting at all because we're all so isolated. So how do you deal with it? I think it's a question that everyone is having to deal with, unless you're going to write historical fiction, and even historical as in set in 2019, you know, that can now be called historical fiction.
It can.
And it's a strange time to be working on a book. I mean, the way I've dealt with it, I'm only really in draft 1 of the book I'm working on now, so it's very, very sort of raw and it's very early days. But yeah, at the moment, my character is kind of referring to, there's only one oblique reference to the pandemic at the moment, which is she talks about, because she's a nurse, and she talks about something like, oh, you know, everyone was clapping for us a year ago or whatever. But even that, I put it in red in my document, so I know that something that's not going to be in the, because. So I'm waffling, aren't I? I don't quite know how I'm going to deal with it, or when I'm going to say, okay, now I'm going to make my decisions.
You've certainly managed to, you know, deal with the new technology as it comes in your book so far, and so I imagine that it's going to be something that gets woven through your final piece in some way.
Yeah, I think it would be wrong not to in some way. It would be like, because, you know, you're creating fictional worlds and fictional universes to an extent, aren't you? But for me anyway, the books I write, I want them to feel real. I want them to feel people can. What am I trying to say? These are incidents and these are characters that are alive but just somewhere else, rather than, I think, to not even address what's going on at the moment would be a bit sort of doing a disservice to my reader, because they'd be like, well, you can't just pretend nothing's happened. After, as a planet, we've all lived through and are all living through this thing. You can't write a book and pretend that didn't happen, you know.
This is a big question, and I think that we'll probably come back to your next book in the next year or two and hopefully find out what you've come to at the end of the struggle. It's been absolutely fantastic to chat to you again, Steve. I can't wait to read more. I know that we have to wait 5 years between your books, but I'm hoping...
Hopefully not 5 this time, but we'll see. Fingers crossed.
It's a ripper of a read. I encourage everybody to grab a copy. If you want a great page turner that you won't be able to put down. You'll have to kind of read it incredibly quickly, because there isn't a point that you can actually stop and breathe in this book. It's fast, and it's got great characters, and congratulations.
Thank you, Krissy. Thank you.
Now, I think Emma Kate might have some. Do you have any questions to ask us, Emma Kate?
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions come through. So the first is, in terms of plotting and spoilers or red herrings, do you go back and rewrite or edit in twists?
Yeah, it's funny because every book is, my process is evolving slightly. So with Before I Go to Sleep, that was very much the first draft kind of just came out, and I didn't plan it all out in any great detail at all, really. So there was a long process of then going back and making sure, especially with that book, given that every single thing in it really changed. If I changed anything, I had to change something else further down the line because of the way the book is structured. So that was a long process of revision and going over and putting things in. Then Second Life was more planned out first, and then Final Cut, the new one, has been planned. I planned it out in quite a lot of detail. So there's less going back and putting twists and turns and things in, because most of them I think I knew when I sat down to write it. But there was always some going back and sort of, with this book it was more things that didn't work in the way I thought they would, or actually worked a bit too well. And because especially with a twist, I'm always looking for, or a reveal, I'm always looking for something that feels like it's come out of the story, that it feels like a natural, albeit an evolution or a story point that the reader hadn't seen coming, but that does feel natural. I'm always looking for the moment when the reader goes, why didn't I see that coming? That was kind of obvious. And that's a difficult thing to get right just from a sort of dry plan on a page or a post-it note or whatever it might be. So there's always a bit of revision involved. So yeah, I think when I'm redrafting, I'm always trying to read it as somebody who doesn't know the story. I mean, obviously that's impossible, but I try to kind of, and I'm always asking me, okay, what would the reader be thinking now? What would they be feeling now? Do I need to wake them up, or so there's this constant sort of backwards and forwards of revision. But yeah, I'm getting to be more of a planner as time goes on. So there's less of that, but it's always there.
Yeah. On a kind of related note, somebody's asked that after your first book, having had your first book made into a film, do you now think about that when writing? So,
sort of yes and no. I mean, I do in a way. I don't sit down thinking I want this book to turn into a film or a TV series or whatever, because I think you can always tell when a novelist has written something that they really probably should be a screenplay, because they're just looking for the film deal. But I think I write in a more cinematic way now, probably. And I remember that kind of came from the experience of seeing Before I Go to Sleep turned into a film. I remember I was on set the day that they filmed. I don't know if you've seen the film, but there's a moment in which Nicole Kidman, she comes out of the house. Colin Firth arrives home from work or something. She rushes out because she's remembered some terrible thing, and she rushes out, and they have this very emotional, very dramatic scene in the rain, and she sinks to the ground and sobbing into a puddle, basically, and it's very sort of visceral and real. And I was on set the day they filmed that, and it was really, really not glamorous. I remember it was freezing cold. It was a really cold day. Wet, so it was raining constantly, but weirdly they had to wait for it to stop raining to then turn on the rain machine and do a take. And I was like, well, it's raining, why do you need a rain machine? But they said apparently real rain doesn't show up on camera in the same way, on film in the same way. So anyway, so they were basically spraying freezing cold dirty water from a tank over Nicole Kidman and Colin Firth as they were doing it. And it was all very fraught as well, because the costume department had refused to clean the clothes more than once. So they could only do 2 takes of this pivotal scene in the book or in the film. And anyway, so I was on set, as I say, and so I was going. When they'd done a take, I walked into the house where they were doing that. They were filming outside to do an interview or something, as Nicole Kidman was coming out to go to her trailer or whatever. And it was so not glamorous. She was kind of like mascara running down her face. She was this towel shivering with cold, soaking wet. And we had a 2-minute conversation, and I just said something like, for the record, I just wanted you to know that in the book, this scene that you've just shot takes place in a really cozy living room by a roaring log fire. And she just said, yeah, but this is more dramatic, isn't it? And I thought, yeah, she's absolutely right. It is. So now I think whenever I'm writing, whenever I'm about to set a scene by a roaring log fire in a nice cozy living room, I sort of think, well, no, actually, what else could I bring to this moment in the book by setting it somewhere more cinematic or more that speaks to what the action is or speaks to the theme or whatever it might be, but just is this, I'm not restricted by having to take place, especially not in a book, but I'm certainly not restricted, like if I was writing a play, for example, obviously you're fairly restricted in terms of scenery and stuff, but it could be anywhere. So why not make it somewhere more dramatic or interesting at least? So in that way, I think my writing has become more cinematic. Actually, I told Rowan that, who was the director, screenwriter. I remember I told Rowan that story, and he said, "Steady on, you're doing my job for me." So, but that kind of is my job as well. So, yeah. So it has changed the way I write slightly, yeah, for the better, I think.
We've had a request for some advice, for any advice that you have for writers, and I'm going to tie it in with the last question that we've got, and we've also been asked how your writing and reading habits have changed during COVID, if they have, and how they have. And so could you speak a little bit about that for us?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to answer the easy part, I've been very lucky in a way with the whole lockdown and COVID situation, because I live alone. I have a solitary. Writing is my job. I'm lucky enough not to have another job, another day job or anything. So in many ways, my life has been kind of unaffected. Certainly compared to the vast majority of people, I think. My work is the same. I still get up in the morning and go to the same desk and sit at the same computer and do the same job. It's changed. Now is a bigger difference, I suppose, because events like this, I'm not in Brisbane, unfortunately. I'm not having that experience. I'm sat here, but that has its pros and has some advantages. But so the travel, and I'm not getting to meet readers, which is a big part of it for me. But the actual core job of writing hasn't really been changed. So yes, I've been affected, obviously, with the anxiety that we're all feeling, obviously, and not being able to really have a social life for quite a long time and everything. But everyone's been going through that. So I've been very lucky, and I was also lucky in terms of writing, because it was always my plan. I spent the first 3 months of this year planning a new book, and it was always my plan to start writing it in the first week of April. So lockdown happened at the end of March for us, or middle of March. So I just stuck with my plan as if nothing was happening. And I've just been writing as if, trying to kind of block that out in a way. So yeah, my writing and my reading has actually, if anything, has been affected in a positive way. Obviously I still wish things were different, but I've been very lucky in that respect. And in terms of advice for writing, I don't know. I always find this quite a difficult question to answer, really, I suppose, because there are so many things. But I think the big thing for me is about reading and writing. It is about writing. It is probably a terrible analogy, and I ought to stop using it, but I've been using it for 10 years now, so why would I stop? But I think it's a little bit, for me, it's a bit like learning to ski, which I don't ski, but I think, you can read books about skiing, and you can watch videos about skiing, and you can talk to people who are really great skiers and go to events and all that kind of stuff. But the only way you learn how to ski is actually by putting the skis on and pushing yourself down the slope and then falling over and then getting up again and trying to go a bit further next time. And then, so I think it's the same with writing, in as much as, you can read about writing, and you can attend seminars, and they are all good things, and you can learn a lot of stuff from listening to other people's techniques and stuff. But really, the only way to write is by doing it and accepting that it's probably not going to be very good. The first draft, especially, is probably not going to be that great, but that's okay. I think, for me anyway, for a long time, I was slightly. It would send me into a bit of a panic. The thought that I would write a paragraph or a chapter or a scene or even a line sometimes and think, well, that's not as good as the book I'm reading at the moment, or that's not as good as Margaret Atwood, or that's not as good as whoever, Krissy, for example. And that would make me think, well, maybe I should just give this up. And, so but it's a process of realizing that none of those are first drafts. I think the thing about reading and literature, unlike many, if not most other art forms, is you can't really see the work that's gone into it. So by that I mean, when you read a chapter or even a paragraph or a line, it feels as though that those words have expressed that thought or that emotion or that scene or whatever it might be so perfectly that no other words could have done it. So therefore that feels like it must have obviously been a first draft that fell out of the author's brain onto the page. But because you don't see the crossings out and the redrafts and the deletions and the trying again and the tears and so I think giving yourself permission to, first of all, writing a lot would be my first piece of advice, but also giving yourself permission to write badly, knowing that you can fix bad writing, but you can't create a book out of a blank page. So yeah. It's interesting because the book I'm working on at the moment, for the first time ever, I wrote an entire draft by hand, in longhand, just because I thought it's a different world. I'd try a different technique, and actually it was a very different process. And part of that was because I wasn't constantly going back and thinking, is there a better word that could go there? Or maybe that paragraph should go at the beginning of this section, or maybe that line should be, because it was writing with pen and paper, and I was drawing arrows occasionally. If I had an idea, I would jot it in the margin, but I wasn't editing as I went. I was just getting it out. So for that reason, it was very quick. And also, even as I was writing, I was sort of thinking, this isn't good, but I'm going to carry on.
Did you have that moment where, because I write by hand a lot too, where you you've written it and you go, oh great, I've done all that work, and then you have to sit down at the computer and type the bloody thing in?
Yeah, but even that, I decided, no, I'm going to treat this as a good thing. So like I had a sort of, I think it was probably up to about 90,000 words in my handwritten draft, and I only typed 60,000 of them in, which was great. I don't mean I typed the first 6,000 and stopped. I mean, even as I was typing it in, I was thinking, actually, this doesn't work, so I won't even bother typing that in. So I was doing an edit even as I was typing it in. So I decided to think of it as an edit rather than just typing in, because suddenly I've got all these pages to get into an electronic form. But I really I've enjoyed it, that process. It's been an interesting one, and I think, touch wood, I mean, I've not finished the book yet, but touch wood, it's worked quite well for me. It seems to engage, but it does feel like it engages a different part of my brain. So the editing part that's sort of constantly trying to make it better, is switched off for that part of the process, which I think is an important thing to do, actually.
I'm looking forward to it. This will be great. I can't wait.
I hope it won't be 5 years.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for a fantastic discussion tonight. We've unfortunately run out of time this evening, but I'm getting comments in the chat box thanking you both for the discussion. So I think that's generally an indicator that people would like to be taken off mute to join me in thanking you both. So unless there's any final comments that either of you would like to make, I will open up the room so that everybody here tonight can join me in thanking SJ and Krissy.
I just want to thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much for inviting me to do this. It's been a lot of fun.
And I just wanted to say that it's a shame we're not there in person, but it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Steve, and I can't wait to do it again in person one day in a post-COVID world.
Excellent. Here's to that. Yeah. I drink my coffee if I hadn't finished it, but I have.
And we can open the room now and we can all clap for final cut.
Okay, you're all off mute.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Krissy. Thank you, Steve. That was great.
Oh, thank you.
That's
Thank you.
lovely. Really good. Really enjoyed it. Yeah. Lovely to see everybody as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. That was lovely. Thank you.
See you all
Have a
later.
lovely evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emma Kate.
See ya. Bye, Emma Kate.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.